Liz, welcome. We have another episode of One on One. Today's topic: diverse voices and stories of Latina veterans. Liz, please introduce yourself to those watching today. I think there's a near special place for you when it comes to voices and stories of Latina veterans. Tell me a little bit about that and yourself.
Oh, DP, thank you so much for having me on your one series. I really appreciate you reaching out and taking the time to hear my story and hear about my podcast. So I am Liz Hensel. I am a Marine Corp veteran, and I created the Latina She Served podcast. And it's about exactly that, the diverse voices of Latina veterans, of military spouses, and other service members who have a diverse story to tell. And every story is unique. It's not scripted. Everything is what you hear is what you get. And there are some pretty incredible stories there. And the first person I ever interviewed, Virginia, she's always going to have a special place in my heart because she was my first interview and been a longtime friend of mine. And she is a Marine Corps veteran. She served in Iraq, and she was a lioness. She was also, she received her citizenship in Saddam Hussein's palace. And I don't think a lot of people can say they did that.
That's
So
pretty remarkable.
right? So she is the very first episode kicking us off with season 1 of the podcast. And I think as we recorded this session, I'm on episode 11, and we're averaging about 500 downloads.
Nice.
So I am really excited of how this has taken off. And they're just stories. They're just stories of amazing men and women and spouses who have a unique perspective of their time with whatever branch of service, because it's Marines, Navy, sailors, and obviously it's a little Marine heavy right now because, I'm a Marine and
Yeah,
most of the
it's your network and your nucleus that you're operating from. So basically, you're saying that you need Army and the Navy and the Air Force to come out in droves and reach out to get on the podcast.
Reach out. Yeah, I want to hear your story too. I don't know. I don't know what you went through, how your boot camp was, what your service was. You always hear the term deployments may vary. I want to hear it. I want to see how deployments vary.
Awesome. So tell me a little bit about your service. How long were you in the Marine Corps? And how long did you serve? What was your job? Just to kind of get some context, which kind of leads into your why for the podcast. 'Cause I think it's a unique space that you're holding, and it kind of is a testament to the numbers you're seeing even early on, because there is a void for those voices and that diversity. But tell me a little bit for those watching to get a little more background on you, your job, and the times that you served.
Sure. So I enlisted in 2006 when I was 17. Straight out of high school, I did maybe a month of college, and then I was like, this is not for me. I'm out. And I did 5 years active duty, one deployment to Afghanistan. And then after active duty, I went straight into the reserves, and I've been serving ever since. I'm married to an active duty Marine, so I'm also, supporting him, following him wherever the Marine Corps takes us. And the reason that I've always had the idea that I wanted to do a podcast. I wanted to talk about these stories. And I was born in Peru. I came to the United States when I was 3, and I grew up in Queens, New York. And I never really experienced racism because where I grew up was like mini South America.
Wait. Let me ask a question. Where in Queens, New York?
Jackson Heights, 97th Street.
Okay. So I was in Ozone. I was in the Ozone area by Brooklyn over by City Line, so I know exactly the area. It is very heavy with like a subculture in there. Yep. As soon as you said that, in my mind, I'm just like, I think I might know where in Queens. Awesome.
Yes. So I grew up in this, very heavily Hispanic community. And then when I was 13, we moved to Cleveland, Ohio. And it was really the first time, I know, huge 180. And it was the first time I was really around Caucasian people. And it was the first time I faced racism. And until that moment, I thought that was just something that you saw on TV. And I remember in high school, this girl was trying to tell me that I couldn't be proud to be Peruvian because I'm in America, and I can only be proud to be American. And that stayed with me. That really, really stayed with me. And then it was one of those things that you brush off, but in the back of your head, it's just like tingling there. And then right before I launched my podcast, my oldest daughter, who's 11, came to me and she told me the exact same thing. She said, Mom, there's this girl at school saying that I can't be proud to be Peruvian because we're in America. And it was just like flashback to me in high school. I'm like, but she's 11, and I'm like, okay, so I guess we have to have this conversation right now. And, we talked about how it's okay to have the pride of both nations. Like I served in the military. I signed a contract saying that I'm willing to die for this country. Like, of course, I'm so proud to be American, and my father and mother were both American citizens, and they're the most patriotic Americans I've ever met.
Right.
Like,
Don't question my patriotism or my work. I earned my space here and done my job and some.
Exactly. And at the same time, I feel the pride to be Peruvian. I grew up on learning the dances, cooking the food, speaking Spanish, the history. Every train ride on the 7 train to go to Manhattan, my dad would always tell me about Peruvian history. And we would go to the Museum of Natural History in New York, and we would have a history lesson of American history. So they were they were very adamant of ensuring that I knew both history of both countries, and to be proud to be part of both my Peruvian ancestry and being an American citizen. And I am. I am very much so proud to be an American. I am equally as proud to be Peruvian. And my daughters are growing up that way as well. Like, be proud to be American. Like, both their parents served in the military. How could they not have patriotism? They do. But at the same time, it doesn't mean it takes away from their heritage.
Now, is your husband where is he from?
He's German. He's from Indiana.
No, and it gives context, because really then it's incumbent on you to try to make sure that you're grounding obviously your children in that there, because you're kind of having to experience that. Obviously his experience is a little bit different than yours, so that further solidifies where your experience of service obviously is going to differ from his experience, just by natural, because of you being a minority, being a Latina and so forth. So again, not to discredit it, but just to kind of get more context of what really has driven that. So you have that storyline that kind of brings you to this point. But one quick rapid fire question off the bat: favorite dish?
Oh, ooh, jalea.
For those that don't know what that is, can you quickly give an example? So the funny thing about Latin cultures is sometimes we'll have similar dishes, but we're calling them different things. And so it's like, okay, what you call this, I call that, but they're kind of the same sometimes, and sometimes there's some stuff that's just completely separate and different. So for those that are like, wait a second, let me write this down. How do I find this? What is this?
So, jalea de pescado, it is, I love seafood, and Peru's, very famous for ceviche. Like, their seafood is amazing. Jalea is basically seafood that is breaded and then deep fried. And it is just delicious. It's my favorite meal. And then my dad does make a really awesome lomo saltado. So it's like my second.
Well, thanks everyone for tuning in to One on One. It's time to go get some food now, because all this talk of food is making me hungry.
It's so funny you say that, because a part of like my podcast is towards the end, especially after like really heavy discussions that I have with my guests. Sometimes I always ask about their favorite food, because it's such an important part of Latin culture.
It's big time, and that's why I said, you know what, forget this. We're going right to it right now, because we got to get right to the front of the line. But I think that's it. It's funny. It seems like a coincidence, but it's not, because it goes back down to really solidifying the diversity of our voice as Latin Americans. In my case, I'm a first generation here born. My parents are Dominican, so I grew up in a Spanish household, and obviously we're very inclined to be, culturally bounded by cooking. My mom, I always saw her either doing her work or at the kitchen. That was kind of what it was. My mom was like the cook of the family, so I can identify a lot with that, because it's part of our what we do, right? Those Sunday gatherings, those weekly gatherings. It was always food centric in some shape shape, fashion, or form, and having those dishes, right? They are reminiscent of where we migrated from. So, but that again, now take it into service context. Sometimes you don't see that, right? And I'm not, I know you for, I know you've definitely seen this. When you're moving around from station to station or base to base and so forth, there may be an understanding of like, oh, they have Spanish food here, and it's just like, not really. Like, not all Spanish food is the same. And I mentioned that because it's not to discredit what's happening; it's to say that it's a very rich and diverse, culture. South America, Central America, the Caribbean. There's so many differences, which are all beautifully, equally great. However, when you're moving in the military capacity, some of those things are missing. So it's easy for someone to have good intentions. Say, hey, Liz, we have this great Spanish spot. You're going to love it. It'll remind me of home. And you're like, no, this is I get what you're trying to do, but it's like saying this Southern comfort food here is going to be just like like your grandma used to make back in the South. Like, no, it's not the same. I understand, but that adds to the detachments of some of the moments, I guess, that mean things to you. So you leave service, you're now as a reservist and as a male spouse. You're kind of wearing two hats, which is pretty awesome. So that dual military, many people cannot relate to that. In my side, I can relate to that. My spouse as well. She is prior service, so we kind of had the dual service thing. So the same type of thing, active and reserve supporting, etc. What really So the one question is, when did you start your podcast, or rather, when did you feel the need that I want to start doing something? Because for some watching, they may have an inclination of saying, you know what, Liz, I think I want to do something, but I'm not sure. Because like when the bug hits you to the point where you actually do it. So when did you kind of get the bug that you might want to start documenting doing something, and when did you start the actual podcast?
So I knew that I wanted to premiere my podcast on 10 November 2020 on the Marine
Okay.
Corp birthday.
Yep.
I was
Yep.
like, I wanted to do it on the Marine Corp birthday. So I kind of prepped myself like 2 months prior. I reached out to a couple of other podcasters and asked for advice. I'm like, I have no idea what I'm doing. I don't know what equipment that I need. Will you be able to give me some guidance? And I started researching, looking on YouTube, and again, reached out to my network of other podcasters. And, some people didn't answer me. That's fine. People are busy. And then the ones that did, though, they gave me very thorough information. So I, took all the notes, and there was a lot of trial and error before I launched with equipment. And just a lot of, oh, this is not working for me, or
Mm-hmm.
I don't feel comfortable with this. You really have to find what works for you, right? And then finally, I was able to get the equipment that I needed to set me off. And then I started reaching out to some friends, like, hey, I'm thinking of doing this, and I would love to have you on it. Like, I think your story is powerful. You're doing, these great things with the community. Like, would you feel comfortable talking about it with me?
Mm-hmm.
And 10 out of 10, they said yes. Like, Liz, just tell me when.
Mm-hmm.
And, like I said, my first guest was Virginia, and she was my first. And it's a little longer because, as a novice podcaster, a lot of trial and error, but the conversation was just so natural, and just listening to her story and I've been friends with Virginia for over 10 years. And this was the first time that I've heard some of the stuff that she said on the podcast that I had no idea, so it creates this ambiance, this kind of safe space. It's just you and me, and just tell me your story. And it just becomes this movement of like, wow, like, you are incredible. You are a leader, and especially hearing those stories from minority women, it's important to me, because
Mm.
I want my daughters to have women with their skin color to look up to,
Mm.
with their background to look up to. And not to take away from any other woman of color, or any, who doing whatever, but that's important to me. That's really, as a mother of, two girls who are growing up in this current climate, I feel it's so important for them to say, like, I can do that too.
Mm. which really kind of solidifies your why. And I think I appreciate you sharing that because there may be some that may be interested and think, you know what, Liz, I want to do something like this because it's a fad, right? It's the thing to do, right? Podcasts are nothing new. They've been around for a long time, but now with everything that's happening in the world, we know there's a resurgence in podcast creations and people kind of speaking up and doing things. So you kind of sharing your why, I think, really adds more credence and really a color and texture to the reason of why you're doing, what you're doing beyond just I'm going to record a few things right now. What would you say to someone out there? Because I want to start digging deeper into what it means to you to be able to actually give now a voice to those that maybe did not think to do so. But what would you say, even though you're kind of still in the beginning stages, to someone out there who may say that's too complex or complicated? I think it'd be cool for me to do something, but you know what, Liz? I'm sure somebody else is doing it. Right, like Liz, why would you even bother? Right, somebody else can do that stuff. Why you? Right, why me? What would you just say to someone that truly has something special to be able to do, whether it be speaking or creating or writing, because it could extend to different ways? What would you say to that person out there?
There's a book. Uh, it's about two brothers who served in the service, and there was a quote from this book that said something like, "If not me, then who?" And that has always stayed with me. And it's a huge reason why I'm an advocate for so many issues, because there's some people who may not be ready, or who may not be ready to want to take the backlash, you know? And I am ready to take the backlash. There's always going to be someone out there who's going to criticize, or who's going to tell you, don't do it. When I joined the Marine Corps, they're like, "Oh, you're too girly. There's no way you can make it." Like 14 years later, here I am,
Yep.
So it's just, there's always going to be someone who's going to try to knock you down.
Yeah.
And you have to remind yourself that you can do this. Why not? Why not you?
And I think there's something interesting there that you said I want you to kind of go back to, which is the backlash. Everything is always flowery when you have the idea of doing something until you have to deal with the criticism that comes with that, right? Well, Liz, what are you doing out there? Like, you don't know what you like. Who died and made you the voice of the Latina veteran experience? Why should you be then doing this? Somebody else already has this platform, or I don't like the way you do your questions, or I don't like it. All these things that come up that obviously we don't want to give energy to are there. So with that being said and done, I don't know if you've had too many of those initial, and again, they come in different waves. Some are going to be outright like, Liz, you suck at this, you should quit. Or some might just kind of be like, that's nice that you're doing it, your little podcast. And you're like, thanks for trying to diminish what I'm doing, but no, I'm going to reject that energy. How do you deal with those type of interactions? Because I'm sure someone else may be ready to experience some of that, sadly, and maybe some of the tools and tips or things that how you processed it may be helpful to them, because I think some folks are not bracing for that impact, where I'm not saying give it energy, but be realistic that may come. So I appreciate you saying I'm ready for that, because I know it's going to come, because I'm grounded in my why. But how does Liz deal with, Liz, who died and made you the voice of the representation committee of Latina voices?
Because there's only one Liz. That's why. There's only one you. If there are other people doing the same thing that I'm doing, that is great, and I will listen and I will support them. But they're not me, and that's fine, and I'm okay with that, because there, especially between women, there's this thing about competition where you have to change that mindset. We're not competing with each other anymore. We're done with that. What we're doing is we're collaborating with each other, and we're empowering each other. You know what I mean? So if I see somebody else with a similar platform as mine, and Clubhouse has brought together so many women podcasters who have a military background, who are women of color, who have reached out to me and who I have reached out to them saying, let's collaborate. I want to hear your story. And they want to hear my story. You know what I mean? So like the competition days to me, in my opinion, are over. Like I am done comparing myself and competing because there's only one Liz and there's only one Latina She Served podcast. But I'm always willing to work together with other women and men.
Mm-hmm.
Like hello, like
Oh yeah. So, and a true testament to that is we met on Clubhouse.
we met in
You know what I
Clubhouse.
mean? So
That's
let's
correct.
so look at us right here having this conversation. Many of the interviews I've been doing lately, I was kind of preface it and saying that this is how we've been able to leverage a platform to go into other spaces. And there's so many things that I want to unpack that we're going to get to here shortly as far as the other things you've done. So you didn't just go the podcast route. There are things that you're doing, you're mobilizing, you're raising awareness, you're active, you're raising awareness and also moving in an activism perspective in many other efforts, which is amazing, but you leverage an app that many might be dismissive of, but it's like anything else. These are tools. And the fact of the matter is, if you use the tools to be able to bridge connections and make those connections, what do you do with them? And I think that you have a powerful story of different things that you've been able to kind of jump on and take advantage of, which I think there's lessons in that. Because today it's Clubhouse. Tomorrow it's fill in the blank. The point is ultimately where there's a will, there's a way. And you have the ability to be able to network and connect, you're going to do that thing. Technology obviously makes it easier for us to be able to cross boundaries and, long distances. But you said something that I would like you to kind of explain for some of our viewers, because I think it's interesting to even acknowledge that there is a competition mentality. But I'd love how you switch the narrative to a collaboration mentality where it's I can have my space and so can you. We can collaborate and support each other without the need of like, no, I will be the Latin voice. No, you will be the Latin voice. I'm like, why can't we be our own voices in this space? Like you said, there's only one Liz, but can you talk a little bit about the competition aspect? Because, obviously, full disclaimer, I'm not a woman. I don't really know about that, but I would assume as a man, I've seen similar things. So I think that's an interesting point and perspective that you took to be able to step up and say, hey, maybe you're not reaching across the aisle, but I'll do that. I'll reach out and try to coordinate with you. But can you elaborate a little bit on the shift of the competition between, let's say, female podcasters or women in business to the narrative of collaboration?
So again, personal opinion, females in the military tend to be alpha females. And it's just going to be a natural want and desire to be competitive. Like I played soccer in college, I was an athlete. So there's always going to be a competition little trait. It's like, oh, gotta be better, gotta be faster, but at the end of the day, why do I have to outbeat a person? Because their story is so different from mine. There's nothing to compete. There's nothing on the table that says we can all share. Because like I said, my narrative is my narrative. My story is my story. Just like their story are their stories. And I want to listen. I want to learn. And I think the biggest thing is that you have to be able, and especially like in platforms like Clubhouse, you have to speak out. Like you have to tell your story. Like you have to step out of that shell. And it's mostly what I've noticed are like women who are in leadership roles that are the ones like, hey, this is what I'm doing. I'm retired and, this and that. And, if I have a retired Marine with 30 years of service, I'm not competing with her. I want to learn from her. I want to reach out and be like, please, I'm taking all the notes. How can I get to where you are? You know what I mean?
Were you always like that?
I think so. I think so. I don't think I've ever. I've always wanted to learn. And I've never been afraid to ask questions either.
as a child, you were the curious child that would kind of ask the questions, probably a little mischief here and there, getting into trouble. Like, what are you doing? I was just looking into this stuff. It's like you hurt yourself again. Well, there goes Liz, trying this out or testing that out or getting into this or that. But coming from a place of natural curiosity that sometimes in children, as you know, as parents, can be suppressed with some, where it's like children sometimes tend to just have a natural curiosity towards life, and some have had that suppressed. So I guess a question for you would be, was that something that natural curiosity always something that you kind of were able to explore, or is it something that was suppressed? Because sometimes in the Spanish community we tend to kind of suppress that, like Liz, you got to blend in, I mean, all these different things that we're told at times. But were you able to work through that to be able to harness that now? Because what's coming across to me is literally that natural curiosity. It's what's kind of pushed you even to have these conversations, right? You're reaching across, you're meeting others, you're saying, I want to collaborate with you, I want to talk with you, I want to interview you. You're naturally just exploring that curiosity of trying to get those stories out of people. Is that something that you've had to kind of, I guess, relearn or strengthen over time now that you're having this outlet for it?
I don't think so, because I have always been the outspoken one in the family, and I was always the one that questioned everything.
Mm-hmm.
Like, my family super super Catholic, grew up super super Catholic, and I was the one always questioning the Bible. Like,
Mm-hmm.
but mom, why is this like this? That makes no sense because
Mija,
science teaches
we don't
this.
ask these questions.
My mom is like, oh no 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 no, like don't grab the rosary, like
Mm-hmm.
how dare you,
Yeah.
That was always me. I was always questioning things. And so now I continue to question things, but now it's in the form of an interview of like, well, how was your experience? I interviewed about 10 different women, a majority Marines, a couple Army, and even though we have also served in the military, all of our experiences were so different,
Mm.
so different. And so, and that's why I say that competition needs to go away, and that comparison needs to go away, because everyone's experience is so unique to their own, going back from how they grew up, because that plays a huge part of, if you, most Latin families, the women don't join the military.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you stay at home until you get married, and then you leave the house. So for Latin women to make that decision at 17, 18, 20-year-old to say, I'm joining the military, it's a very hard pill for Latin moms to swallow, you
Mm-hmm.
know? So it's very, I feel it makes the stories that much more powerful.
No,
If
I agree. Hey,
you know,
count me into it. I have sibling sisters, and I was the one that went off to the military and was able to do that. And my younger sisters, and that was not a conversation. It was kind of like, that's his path. That's what he's doing. You're gonna go the school route. You're gonna go the this route. Same thing. You'll move out when you're married, type of stuff. Like, all those typical things are reminiscent of a lot of Latin communities and families. But again, going against the grain and kind of going your own way. So then a second question because of that is, what would you say to someone maybe that doesn't have that in them or feels the opposite? And we've all known them, the ones that are not the outspoken ones. Like, Liz, you don't get it. I just kind of, I'm going to be a peacemaker. I'm going to go with the flow. I don't like confrontation. I don't want to be that person. What would you say to that person that truly has a curiosity inside, but maybe they don't have that skill set or have not been that outspoken person? What would you say to those out there that really just need a little nudge to say, hey, there's a truth in there. There's a power in here. There's a curiosity and a goodness that needs to come out. What is Liz's advice to someone, as someone who's taken the stand to stand out there of like, Liz, that's scary stuff that you're doing. I can't do that. There's just no way. What would you report back to those saying, is it safe out there for me to speak up?
do your research. Like, do your research. That way, if like, let's say you're thinking about enlisting and your parents are completely against it, like, there's no way you're going. If you do your research, if you have a good recruiter, and honestly, if that recruiter is not answering your questions, then get a new one.
Mm.
There's tons of them. They're everywhere, and they want to recruit you. Believe me, and they're gonna want to tell you everything you want to hear. So do your own personal research. And
Mm.
if that recruiter isn't answering your questions, then you can't go home with, like maybe. You have to go home like, no, this is what's going to happen. They laid it out, and this is what's going to be in the contract. Also,
Yes.
read your contract.
Yes.
Read your
Yes.
contract before you sign it.
What? You can read those things?
Yeah.
What would you say to someone now, let's say they're past service or they're a little bit further in life? They may feel they have a message or have something to speak out on, but they may not have the confidence to take that stand. Another Latino woman out there, for example, who may say, I admire what you're doing, Liz, but I just can't see myself doing anything like that. What would you say to those out there who may doubt themselves or feel like that's for you guys? I can't do that.
Well, there's so many outlets out there, and you don't necessarily have to come out in a public platform. Just find your local like VFW or Team RWB or what's the other one, DAV,
Mm-hmm.
or what's the other one, that
Yep.
Afghanistan.
There
Yeah,
you go.
yeah.
All right, there it is.
Yeah.
IAVA. You think that was scripted, but it wasn't.
Yeah, IAVA. There's so many veteran groups out there, so many Facebook groups, Clubhouse now, where if you're not ready to share on a public platform, and a lot of people aren't, then share in the capacity that you are able to. And if you're not even ready to share with anybody, write it to
Mm-hmm.
yourself. Or one of the things that I used to do, I used voice recorder on my phone, and I would talk to myself. Sounds kind of crazy, but it works, because then I would listen to what I was saying, what I was feeling, and then I would write those thoughts down. It's like, oh wow, I'm going through some pretty heavy thoughts right now. But it was an outlet. Is how I let it out until I felt ready to share in a public platform or with other people. But there's definitely so many resources and so many organizations out there that you can reach out to.
That's amazing, and I love that you kind of had that introspective period. I always kind of joke around like if I had to hear myself, my recorded voice myself, it'd feel like chalkboard and nails coming down because I don't want to hear my own voice. But I think but the point I think that I think it's admirable is the fact that you made a point to take time to kind of just hear yourself and explain and expand into that space and really own your voice. Let me ask you, what does it mean to you to be able to have these conversations? We talked a little bit about kind of your journey, your service, getting to the point of starting the podcast, but now when it's all said and done, when you're done speaking to another person like you did with, for example, the very first one, you knew her for how many years, but yet this is the first time you truly got a chance to listen. What does that do for you personally to be able to hear these diverse voices?
I feel so empowered after every interview. While I'm interviewing, I'm taking notes. And when I read back the notes, I'm like, wow, first of all, how blessed am I to have these people in my life? Second of all, I thank them for their vulnerability of sharing certain things. Like it's not easy to talk about some of these subjects, and their vulnerability gives me strength to kind of own my vulnerability. And so it just really encourages me to continue, because I know if I'm feeling this way, then my listeners are probably feeling some kind of way as well, like empowerment, or just like, wow, that really happens. And I get messages from listeners all the time just telling me, wow, what a story. Or from male Marines telling me, I am so pissed that that happened to her. Like, I cannot believe that happened to her. So it really opens up the perspective to other leaders, to other Marine Corps leaders who are currently serving, of like, hey, I need to be aware of this. I need to be more self-aware to ensure that this doesn't happen or continue to happen to other Marines or soldiers or sailors.
And I think that goes back to owning your voice and knowing the fact that you are who you are, right? That impact that we're able to give. It's always interesting to me where in the military, right, we have different jobs and we do different things, and everybody knows that everybody has their specific role, right? No one ever said, I'm not going to join because they already have someone doing that job. Or why should I be an infantry soldier where they already have an infantry soldier, right? Why am I going to be an officer? They have enough officers. We understand that there's a need in different places for people to serve in different places, at different capacities, jobs, ranks, responsibilities, and so forth. No different in the veteran space, or after service, where it's like, no, there's different needs that are being met. The way you conduct your business, the way you ask the questions you ask, the way you present yourself on your platform is serving a specific, sector. Whereas there's, to your point, a collaboration with someone else who may have a different point of view, but they're over here. And that's okay because, again, now we're covering all these different areas to be able to do a lot of the things, i.e., bringing awareness to things, breaking stigma, having the hard conversations that oftentimes are not being had to be able to bring to light what's actually happening. Because you know how it goes. There are many individuals that just, quite frankly, don't have a voice. They don't speak up about what's happening, and we see it, right? We all know what's going on, but it always kind of stays suppressed at times. And I think being able to tackle the hard subjects in a safe environment, in a way that gives honor to the person that you're bringing on to speak to, I think that's how change starts to happen. Because I'm sure you've seen this already, where that conversation is not only impacting you, but it's the listeners who can relate and say, I'm not alone in that feeling. Maybe there was something
Exactly.
that guest said that now gives me the ability to say, you know what? If she can do it, I can. If he can make it, I can. And sometimes we have to have those real world examples that are tangible versus this nebulous bigger picture of like, it'll be okay, just push through. Like, no, 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 I'm seeing and hearing your story. It resounds with me. In turn, now I'm going to go get this help, or I'm going to go seek mental health, or I'm going to go ahead and speak about the traumas that I've experienced and the things that I may have been subjected to, because I think oftentimes that's what's missing. And that's one of the reasons I think is it's amazing, to the very first thing we talked about, that not only are you giving a voice to the voiceless out there, and I say that for the audience members, because the people and the heroes that you're talking to are really being able to be a voice for the others who can't step up or may not have the access to do that, and sharing their stories, especially from the Latino community, which is, it's a large community, but we also understand that there's a lot of things we don't talk about. For example, I always share my service dog. Actually, his birthday is the Marine Corps birthday. He just turned 2, so he's November 10. It was his birthday. Fun fact, I also am a graduate of the Marine Corps University Command and Staff College. So while I am Army, there's a near place in my heart for the Marine Corps because I spent some time there. But I'm sharing that to say that for my service dog specifically, that's the first time I ever had to have a conversation with my parents about mental health. Because if you think about it, right, you don't just go home and say, hey, mom, or hey, pop, I got PTSD, or I'm dealing with some depression. Like, those conversations don't happen in the Latin community. One of the things I always kind of joked about is saying there's no such thing as PTSD in Spanish. Like, wait a minute, what do you mean? I'm being sarcastic. But the fact is, there's no conversation that really happens between, a son and a father, mother, or daughter, father, mother situation where you kind of say, I'm dealing with something. It's like, you're good, right? You're okay. You're fine. And you're like, yes, I am fine. But you know what I'm saying? Because again, we migrated here. We have to be strong. We have to present ourselves, not to be less than. We have to be able to kind of hit the ground running and advance, where we came from. And when you say something like mental health is something that sometimes many of our veterans, especially in our community, are dealing with, how do you have that conversation? So for me, having a service dog, created that space to have that conversation of being able to kind of break some stigmas within our communities of saying, no, look, hey, that doesn't mean that I'm less than or I can't do things. It's just, this is a reality. It's no different that had I been hit by a vehicle, you wouldn't, care for me less if I had a limp or I had lost the ability to do certain things physically. This is emotional or psychological traumas that happen and people have to work through, but you can't work through or heal anything unless you're truthful and honest with what's happening. So to that point, what are some of the things that you've seen on your side as having these conversations with your guests when it comes to mental health? Because I'm sure that's one of the themes that has come up at some time or another where we don't talk about this.
Yes. So I've had a couple of guests who have talked about their MST experience, which is military sexual trauma. And my I have my one guest who it took her 20 years to admit that, hey, I need help, or like seek assistance from the VA, to where she felt she rated the help. So healing happens. There's no timeline to healing, right? There's no timeline to seeking help, and it's just one of those things where I'm a huge advocate of it's okay to not be okay, because a lot of these veterans who have deployed to a combat zone or have PTSD from um, MST or whatever it is, because PTSD can come from anywhere, right? You don't necessarily have to go to a combat zone to get PTSD. Trauma is trauma, and I call it the invisible injuries of war, because you could look perfectly fine on the outside, but you have no idea the battle that people face internally every day. So, when I was diagnosed with PTSD, I had a person try to shame me, uh, downgrade my service, like you don't rate that. Like, what did you do? And then I let it get to me a little bit. This was back in 2010. And then about 2012 is when I took back my power, and where I had a hard conversation with myself. Like, you went to a war zone and you saw some awful things. How can you be okay from the stuff that you saw? You can't. Any normal human person would not be okay from that. And that is okay. And that's when I really started advocating for myself, seeking out like mental health treatments. And a lot of my guests, same thing. Timeline may be different, but it's always the same thing. It's always going to be someone trying to like make them feel ashamed of what happened to them, or for my MST guest, the "Are you sure?" Like, yes, she's like, yes, I'm sure that this happened to me. You know what I mean? So there's always going to be someone who's going to try to downgrade whatever happened to you, or downplay the injury. And we have these conversations every day at Clubhouse, and it's great to have that outlet to where we can just scream our frustration, because you're surrounded by other veterans who understand that sentiment. And having that outlet is so important. And I'm so grateful for Clubhouse and finding you on there, and you leading the conversations that we have there. So it's okay not to be okay. It's fine. And it's going to be fine, because now our resources are even better. We have more nonprofit organizations that are tailored to MST, PTSD, and TBI. So we're definitely moving towards the right direction and getting that assistance that veterans need.
I think there's a powerful point, a few powerful points in everything you just said. I think the regaining of your power and your voice. And for many that are out there who've experienced trauma, I've always said trauma is trauma is trauma is trauma. The body does not understand or dictate the difference between there was an IED, there was an explosion, there was a military sexual assault, or there was a physical assault, or there was a near-death experience outside the base, here CONUS. The point at hand is there's the fight or flight situation of like, is this it right here? There's that trauma that happens and your body gets stuck into that. And for many of us, it's that loss of control that really, becomes a big, big factor. And for you to be able to say that you took back, your power, to be able to kind of begin to own your journey to get better, I think it's a good way to frame it, because some would say it's an oxymoron. How can you have power when you feel helpless and powerless? But the fact of the matter is, you took ownership of your journey to get better, to look at resources and understanding these are the things that I need. I think you were in one of the rooms that we talked, and one of the things that I kind of have been saying lately, and I said this with Carmen, the photographer that we met the other day in one of the rooms, is in service, especially you'll definitely get this reference. But in service, there's no problem calling for backup. There's no problem calling for reinforcements. There's no problem calling for support. If you are operating in a forward environment and you're running low on support on supplies, you're going to call support to help give that supply. Again, extreme examples. If you're holding the line and you're running low on ammo, no one's going to look at you any less and be like, what do you mean, Sergeant so-and-so, that you are running out of bullets? You mean you can't take on the offensive this way? No, you're going to call back for that support because that's what we do. If you're in the Marine Corps, I always use the example of MACTAF. The way it works, the Marine Air Force Air Ground Task Force has the ability to morph to what it needs. If we're going to do an air offensive, if we're going to do a land offensive or ground operations, you have the ability to coordinate all those elements in a combat space. Those things are looked at from a powerful perspective. You need air support, call it in. The MACTAV has the ability to do that. The Marine Corps is very agile in that way. I use that example to say that now that we've left service, it's no different to call in support. It's no different than Liz is leaning into life and she's running low on supplies. So she needs to call in some support to get some backup. You're running low on ammunition. I'm not saying the fight is over. It's saying that you are in this foxhole running out of ammo. You need support. I need ground support. I need air support. I need fill in the blank support to continue to do the mission that I'm doing as I advance through life. And I think if we change the narrative of calling for help, it's not help, it's support. Right now, Liz is stepping in for another woman who needs some support. They're not out to fight. They're taking a knee behind cover and reloading. It's no different than how we conduct operations, right? I'm reloading. Guess what Liz is doing? She's laying down suppressive fire while I reload, get back in the fight, and we keep moving, right? Those tactics are applicable to life. I'm literally saying, Liz, cover me. I need some support right now. I have to reload. I'm out. And that might mean I have to take a break and go get therapy or get myself right or take a break and step back and know that there are others around me who can hold down the line. I think that when we start to look at it that way, it changes how we look at being able to reach out to others, because we would have no, again, shame in calling for support if we were pinned down and things were looking grim. So in life, it's the same thing. If you're being pinned down and it's, you're getting attacked from the front, from the left, from the right, call in that support because it's there. We are there. That's why we're having these conversations, to break the stigma and be able to begin creating pathways for some that may have felt hopeless, so they don't feel alone, they don't feel detached. I think it's a powerful thing that you're doing on your side with your podcast. I want to jump over to the website and have you kind of talk to us a little bit. But here we have latinasheserved.com. What can we find here on this website outside of the podcast and things that you have?
So all the episodes are listed on the website. Yeah, there is our latest episode with
Awesome.
Hensel. Pretty incredible. So all of the episodes are uploaded there. You can also find it on iHeartRadio, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts.
Okay.
There is a contact page there as well. There is some of my guests that have shared recipes of their favorite Latin recipes.
Like we talked about the food, yes. Wait a second. Why is a recipe not towards the front?
It's a huge part of the Latin culture, so it's really important for me that we have food in there. And we have our contact page, and then our social media pages as well. You can link to our Facebook and our Instagram. And then if anyone, would like to get on the podcast, just reach out to me. I would love to have you.
So they can reach you here in the contact page. You also have a sponsor section as well for those that might want to sponsor the podcast. So this information is here with information. Definitely head on down to the recipe side because that's where the good stuff's at. The episodes are pretty cool too, but I'm just saying. No joke. I'm joking. But I think it's awesome that you took a platform here to not only showcase the amazingness of the stories you're capturing, but the life around it. And we're kind of enjoying the recipe side here, but it really just shows to me that you're really capturing the fullness that is the guest who comes on and kind of leaves a little bit of themselves here by their favorite dish, kind of how we talked about earlier. But the sponsor piece also, it's self-explanatory. I wanted to bring up the Instagram page for those that are on the gram to be able to see the things that you're doing. The hyperlinks are there as well for the episodes, and your website, Latina She Served on Instagram is how they can find you. But you don't stop with the podcast. There's another near and dear cause to your heart that you have talk to me a little bit of what I'm seeing here. Leave no pause behind.
So Leave No Paws Behind USA, it is a nonprofit that I created 2 years ago. So we received military orders from California to Japan, and we have our dog Prince, who's pictured there. He's the face. He's the face of Leave No Paws Behind USA. And I started researching. My husband called me. He was actually deployed. I think he was deployed for like a month when I got the phone call. Hey, got orders. Like, where are we going? Japan. Okay. Let me start doing the research. And during my research is when I found out the struggles military families face when they have to PCS overseas with their pets. The system is broken. The system is broken. There is no across the board policy for pet transportation. And our military families are paying anywhere from $3,000, which is, it seems to be about the average, to up to $10,000.
That's what I just highlighted it. Holy cow! Like that's actually out of pocket fees you have to pay.
Out of pocket fees,
Huh.
absolutely. And these are duty stations where you're going there for 3 years. These are 3-year orders, right? And I basically said, what is happening here? We are already asking our families to, pack everything they own, take kids out of school, and move them across the world to a complete different country, new culture, new schools. And on top of that, I may have to face the option of leaving my pet behind because I can't afford it. We're not ready for this. So I created Leave No Paws Behind USA to advocate for these families. So the advocacy portion of Leave No Paws Behind USA is we're lobbying to have pet transportation fees included in the Armed Forces Appropriation Budget. And I actually had a meeting with Senator Booker's staff last week, and they're on board. We're going to move forward, and we're doing the research.
I gotta go back. You can't just drop that nugget on us just randomly. Like I just met with Senator. Wait. I know the story, but this goes back to what we talked about, which is you leveraged an app that led to a thing. Tell us that story because I want you to kind of inject that because that one it speaks to creating sometimes like look you saw no door so you kicked a hole and got through it and made a way. That's resiliency and some. Tell us real quickly how you even got to the point of being able to have that meeting with a senator.
So through Clubhouse there was a room called nonprofits, and Eric Ranks, he was the one that was moderating that day. And if you're on Clubhouse, you'll see his name everywhere, especially within the veteran community. And so I just happened to be, it was like my third day on Clubhouse. And I was just in this room and I shared my story about like why I created a nonprofit, why I think it's so important. And I had a congressional staffer reach out to me saying, I work on the Hill. So then that conversation started. Then one of my guests had more connections on the Hill. So utilizing both those resources, I was able to reach out to a congressional staffer who, back and forth dialogue, and eventually we settled on a meeting date. And then the conversation got started to have policy, essentially legislation included, to have pet transportations covered for military families PCSing overseas. And it is like two years of like hard work and dedication, and that negative feedback, people telling me like why should the military pay for this? Like I get a lot of like
you're wasting your time, stop it, it's a luxury, not a requirement.
Everything. And it was like you gotta have tough skin, and you gotta have tough skin to be in the military, to work in politics. Like you have to have it. And did it hurt? No, it didn't, because I believed in the cause. I believe that these military families are already, you're in it for the long haul, and your spouse is going to a duty station where it's a high deployment rate. So yes, you get to go overseas, but guess what? You might not see your spouse for like 80% of the time you're there because of the deployment ratio. So on top of that, now you can't even have the one constant in your family, which is that dog or that cat, So it's a very important cause to me, and and it's paying off. And those people who are like, oh, the military shouldn't pay for this, right? Like, you don't know people's situations. You don't
Mm-hmm.
know if people decide they don't want kids. That's their choice. Great. And that pet is going to be their baby. Awesome. What about the family who's having infertility issues? And that pet is their comfort pet. Like, that is their baby because, they've been trying so hard and they just can't. Like, who are we to judge anybody's stories and decision? And I previously worked on the Hill, and I know what goes into Armed Forces appropriation budget. And especially after talking to Senator Booker's staff, I know that it's not a big ask when it comes to, like, people. Like, don't worry about, we shouldn't be paying for the military's intended transportation, because trust me, if you pull that policy, if you read that legislation and you see what else is being paid for, this should not be a problem, especially if we're helping military families. And as you can tell, I'm like extremely passionate about this.
No, because but that goes to the point of doing something that means something to you. But you went a step further. You didn't just stop there. But then also, what is this?
So that is our current fundraiser. So the second aspect of the nonprofit is we try to assist financially to offset some of those transportation costs. So whether it is the transportation fees, veterinarian fees for like the health certificate, or like last minute crate accessories, or anything like, the PCS changed last minute, then you have the crate in time, then we financially assist to cover those costs. So this is our current fundraiser right now. So it's just a cute little mask with the little paw print and our logo, the plane with Leave No Paws Behind USA on it. So we're just fundraising we're a grassroots organization. We've only been running for 2 years. So we are a baby nonprofit, which means our funding is very low. So 100% of the proceeds go back to the military families. I'm pretty much a one-person team. So I don't pay myself, like, not even administration costs. I pay that out of my own pocket because I know the struggle. I know the struggle.
Mm-hmm.
And so any donation, anything that's raised from the fundraiser goes straight back to these families.
And you have your logo on here, which is pretty awesome. Let's see. So, and this is also linked so they can find the information on Leave No Paws Behind. But we'll make sure that these links are available for folks to be able to support, sponsor, and things like that. You also have, let's see here, the support page as well as the sponsor page with some of the amazing things that are here, supporters, along with resources, which I think is pretty cool to be able to showcase some of the resources that are available. And when did you guys start this fundraiser here on Bonfire?
We just launched this last week.
Okay. And I'm assuming this is being shared also on your socials and the crowds that the folks that you have here and that information as well.
Yes. So if you go to our Instagram page, the link is there, and on our Facebook page, the link is there as well.
Okay. Awesome. No, and I think that it's again, I wanted to just focus on it and say it because I think it's just powerful to share the message, talk a little bit about it for folks to really kind of get a good understanding of what you're doing, of what's out there. For those that didn't see it, I also wanted to pull up the Facebook page here. Latinas You Served as well is where you can find the information and more stories and data here for the movement, as well as the collaborations and things that you are doing, which I think is pretty awesome. But yeah, I think it's powerful. We want to obviously support you here at Veteran Network to be able to kind of push that forward. Obviously, there's always a special place for fur babies and furs support, right? On my side, the way I see it. So we'll collaborate as well and support. So what we'll do on our side of the house is we're going to support 50 of those masks in the raising of that there. that you have so you can pretty much kind of use it on your platform, and however we want to distribute those, we can. Those that are seeing this, you can comment below as well, so we'll make sure we get that going. But again, in supporting your cause and what you're doing and kind of pushing it forward, we're going to go ahead and sponsor 50 of those masks to be able to, again, help move that forward, help some of those families to offset costs, because I think, again, it's not only your passion, but it's about aligning and supporting things that are actually making a difference, like you said. So that's something unscripted on our side, just to kind of support you and what you're doing, because I think it's something very admirable. So I wanted to just kind of put that out there for those. So if you're interested in one of these masks, let me pull up again so people can see it, because now people are like, wait a minute, let me take a look at it.
Thank
You
you,
know,
PP.
no, you're welcome. We want to pay it forward. So, we're going to go ahead and secure 50. We'll coordinate with Liz so we can have 25 stage on her side, 25 stage on Better Network, to be able to share that with our followers and viewerships and so forth. So we'll go ahead and do that. But still, go out here, get one for yourself, fight for somebody else. Even if you're, let's say, gifted ones, get one for a friend and support it, because I think this is how we begin to mobilize and support our fellow veterans that are doing some amazing things. So again, leave no pause behind here. We went to the website, latinasyoserve.com, the Instagram that she can be found at latinasyoserved on Instagram, same on Facebook, and then here, leave no pause behind USA.com, where again, the work that you're doing, being able to get with a senator to have this conversation, leveraging social media and Clubhouse and a talk app to be able to actually have this conversation and do that, I think is definitely admirable. And it goes back to, the diverse voices of even your own story and what you're doing, because you're trailblazing in your own way. So in closing, one of the questions I had for you is, what would you want to say to those out there who may be watching this? What's your call to action to those watching and listening to us right now?
Don't give up. I know sometimes things look really rough and really dark. And for me, that dark period was 2011. I literally call it the dark year, because that's what it was for me. And I didn't give up. And I just kept fighting. And like you said, I found my support team. I found my support fire. And now I'm thriving. And not to say that there's not any, it's not rainbows and butterflies. It's not, I definitely experienced throughout the years some clouds, but it's not a dark year, and I just don't give up. So don't give up. No matter how dark you think you are, no matter how hopeless it may feel, you're not. You absolutely not. Because now more than ever, we have the resources and the support to seek the help that we need.
Awesome. Liz, thank you, one, for your time, for being flexible. We were going to coordinate to link up, and then things kind of fell out of our scheduling. But I'm happy and glad that we were able to hold this space and have this conversation. One, to give again more strength and voice to what you're doing, Latinas You Serve, the podcast, what you're doing beyond that with your nonprofit, being able to serve a need that many are oblivious to it, because you know how it is. In my mind, once you get a PCS and everything's kind of being taken care of, all that's covered, right? Negative, it's not. And again, it's the same reaction you got when you were able to get the audience, with the senator, to be able to say, what do you mean that's not being covered? No, it's not. And then that's how things begin to change. That's how you lobby effectively. It's identifying issues. So I would say, in my closing thoughts, if you identify something out there that's missing, Liz saw a problem, rolled her sleeves up, and said, I'm going to get involved and try to help find a solution for that problem. It took a little bit of time, but now you start to see it kind of coming together, and lives will be changed, families will be assisted, and those gaps that were there will be filled. And there are many other areas where you may be seeing things that may need some support and help. And if you see the problem, there's two types of folks, I guess, right, in the military. Those that identify problems and those that say, okay, I see a problem, let's try to fix it. Let's try to lend resources however we can. Let's try to start solving problems versus identifying problems. Sometimes we all can see the gaping, gaps that are out there at times. So I just wanted to really just again commend you and appreciate you for holding space with me, being able to be here. This is a one-on-one special that we're doing here with Liz, the diverse voices and stories of Latina veterans, the amazing work that you are doing, and the future collaborations. So, like I always say, it's the first record a conversation we're having, but not the last one because there's so many other things to unpack. But I think this is a great start to be able to introduce what you're doing on your platform and then begin the conversation moving forward to get more granular in some of the tactical things that you're doing. So I really appreciate your time and you being here.
No, I thank you, DP. Thank you for hosting all those rooms from Clubhouse and really connecting other veterans with each other and creating opportunities just like this, you know. So thank you for what you're doing.
Nothing. It's a team effort. That's where I look at it. So each one teach one, and I think coming together and supporting and finding others. So I encourage folks out there, reach out. You may feel so. Alibi. Last question. Someone out there is looking at this great platform. Love what you're doing, but I don't have a story. I don't have to be on your podcast. What do you say to that person who's thinking I don't have something to say because who am I to share a story and be on a podcast? What's your final call to action for those that need to reach out to get on the podcast?
Everybody has a story, regardless of how small you think it is. What's that? What's that quote that goes like even like one pebble makes multiple ripples,
Mm-hmm.
and you just never know. You just never know how big of a ripple you're gonna make until you try. You know, I've had so many guests tell me that, like, oh, like, no, nobody wants to hear my story. And then I show them the statistics, like, look how many downloads. Like, I get people tell me that they missed their work exit because they were so involved in your story. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So you just don't know until you tell your story. So, and there's nothing, there's no shame in not being ready to share your story either.
Mm.
But if you do need to share your story, share it with yourself first. So whether you record it, whether you write it, just let it out.
I love that. There's no shame in not being ready to tell your story yet, which is, I think, a hopeful and a seed planted of just because you're not ready doesn't mean the story doesn't need to be told. But it's honoring your journey to be able to say, when you're ready, trust me, we want to hear it. So I love how you kind of phrase that. I think that's a great point to kind of end on for those that are out there. If you're ready, step up. But if you're not ready, it's okay. Have some grace with yourself. But best believe we're watching and we want you to be able to share that story because there's something in there that's going to be able to help someone else. And those ripples can change lives because we are living examples of someone else's ripple that benefited and spoke into our lives to be able to be here today doing these things as well. Liz, I appreciate you. I was blessed by your presence and being here today and having this conversation. And I look forward to many more conversations in Clubhouse and here recorded.
Thanks, DP.
Awesome. Until next time, we'll catch y'all later.